all right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Hello everyone, welcome to Lighthouse, to the Edinburgh launch of Candice Chung's new book, Chinese Parents Don't Say I Love You. Candice is a writer, an editor, and a former restaurant reviewer for the Sun Herald in Australia. Candice's new book, which I don't have, this is the nice cover. My cover ripped, unfortunately. But this is the beautiful cover. Candice's new book is about saying the unsayable with food. With beautiful, funny, and poetic language, Candice dives into how shared meals and culinary adventures confront the unspoken and the unsayable, with her family, her new partner, and herself as well. It's a book about how food is the ultimate love language. So please join me in welcoming Candice Chung to Lighthouse Books.
Thank you so much for being here. This is working, right? Everyone can hear me properly. Yeah, and also on a rainy evening, I feel very grateful. It's also very Scottish, so thank you. My book is a memoir, and this is actually quite an early event. The book isn't coming out until the 24th officially, so everyone's getting a sneak peek today. My book is about the small intimacies of our eating lives, and how, and by that I mean the private rituals that we have by ourselves, with our loved ones, and also like with friends and family. And it's about also how food bring us together, but also sometimes keep us apart a little bit. It's set during a time in my life when I was a food reviewer in Sydney, and in that job you need people to eat with, technically because you want to be fairly discreet that you are there, not just reviewing. You want to be an ordinary person there, but ordering 3 plates of pasta by yourself kind of draws attention to you. So in that era of my life, I had just broken up with my partner of 13 years. And generally it's quite easy to go to a restaurant with a partner. They find it harder to say no than your friends. And so at that time, when I found myself having no one to eat regularly with, my parents offered to come eat with me and be my new plus ones. So that's that memoir, or that era of my life, is what basically I tried to capture in the book.
Yeah, you capture it so beautifully. Thank you for setting the scene for us. And would you be up for doing a bit of a reading to set the scene even more?
I would love that. I would love to do a reading. So I'm going to start at the very beginning. And I mean it, so it's the prologue. Okay. Now tell me, what can I get you? And is everything okay? I'll be right there, yes. Here, let me take these things away. At the restaurant, we hear all the things we want our lovers to say. Gadical Land, Sydney, December 2019. I meet my parents at a fish shop in an inner city mall. By the time I get there, they are waiting in their windbreakers and matching hiking shoes. I greet their outdoor energy with a wave hello. This mall has good parking, Dad says. Since my parents retired 3 years ago, they have been wearing hiking shoes everywhere. Because Dad also keeps a pen in his shirt pocket and likes to bring a backpack, this gives him a ready-for-anything look that I both enjoy and find disorienting. It was around the time of my parents' style evolution that I started asking them along to restaurant reviews. Before writing for the paper, I assumed food writers simply showed up to new restaurants with witty fly-by-the-seat-of-their-pants types. But those types have inconveniently full lives. To meet deadlines, you need a different kind of dining companion. Someone who will eat with you at short notice. Someone willing to get on the train for an hour of an urgent sommelier lunch. Someone close enough to let you order everything and pick food off their plates, and who doesn't mind if you point a camera in their direction, causing them to smile before you say, "Wait, your head is blocking the light to the risotto. Would you mind?" That person used to be my partner. He was a psychic reader when we met. For $45, he'd given me a half-hour tarot card reading and studied the spidery lines of my palms. "You were slightly allergic to nightshades," he said, as if I hadn't gone in to ask about love. That day, the cards on the faded oak table said nothing about a relationship starting. How we were weeks away from falling into each other's lives. There was no sign yet of my parents' shock, or the decade-long rupture, or how, 13 years later, things would end on a wet summer's day without warning, just like the way we started. If he saw those things, he chose to keep quiet. Now I wonder if there's only so much he can bear to say. That summer of the first reviews with my parents, I'd turned 35. It was the year I left the psychic reader, quit my full-time job in a newsroom to become a freelancer, and, for 6 months, quietly moved back into my suburban childhood home.
That was lovely. Thank you so much, Candice. And for some context also, Candice and I were friends. And also we were first draft buddies. So I've read parts of Candice's book, but in a very early version of them. And Candice did the same for me. So it's so lovely to sort of hear and read the final version of the book. And I'm just so proud of you. And I feel like we really went through it together over the last year and a bit.
We did. I did a lot of kind of internal and external crying, which you supported me through. And it was really nice to have just camaraderie.
Yeah, I think we needed it, especially for this sort of writing, which is memoir.
Yeah.
And quite personal and can be quite difficult and challenging sometimes.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you sort of at the beginning about the structure of the book, because it's divided into 3 parts. There's etiquette for the solo diner, etiquette for lovers, and etiquette at the family table, which is lovely. I was wondering how you kind of came to that structure and how you found it.
That's a really great question, and also one that I love to answer because I love craft things. And when you're writing, it's the stuff that is just in your brain and agonize over, and there's no outlet. So this is my outlet now. But in all seriousness, the structure was very important to me. In order to find the right structure was what helped open up the book or the story, the narrative for me. At the very beginning, actually, I had played around with other structures, and at one stage, I thought that, maybe my book will be a glossary, and that's how, and then I'll have vignettes about different aspects of my eating life, and that's how the book will come together. Partly because I'm a trained journalist, and usually the writing size or the article length is about 1,000 words per piece. And I'm like, maybe I can do that. That's less intimidating than thinking in 10,000 word chapter terms. So it was a way to kind of comfort myself. But soon I found that that was just not the right, it was not the structure that allowed me to actually explore the narrative, the bigger story that I wanted to tell. So ultimately I find myself trying to serve that structure, trying to put things into alphabetical order rather than having an organic structure to the story that I can then immerse myself into. So one thing that was very helpful actually is that I went back to welcome. I went back to Ursula Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction, which I know that you stock over there around the corner, I saw. And that was incredibly helpful to me. I knew then that I needed to find the right container for the book. And so part of that is that the actual chapters, the chapters themselves, will sort of have different forms. Like they will take more of a lyric structure than a conventional linear timeline, or like, going from A to B to C kind of structure. So for instance, one chapter is a do's and don'ts list, and then another is just a text message, and then yet another is a choose your own adventure style chapter. And it isn't really for the sake of novelty, but rather it was also my way, or the stories, or the subconscious of the book's way of figuring out what happened in my own life. So their attempts to understand this time in my life, so to speak.
Yeah, it also feels like true to life of how you experience life, like through these different forms of text. Because your life isn't really like when you start reading a memoir, it's like, I was born in
Yes.
19, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not really how you experience life. You experience life through lots of different texts and things like that. So I think, like, the choose your adventure, the text messages, it feels like true to life, or when you're wanting to write about your own life.
Yeah, it's funny. So even though a structure like this might feel unconventional, it's actually an experience that does feel true to me, because and you'll know this when you're in a pub trying to tell the story of your day. Different timelines kind of like cross over, and you find yourself like just really trying to describe your day, but in the end succumb to like a punchline or something, because that seems to be the way that the story goes, and it's a little bit like that. And the other thing too is that I was thinking that I feel like for most people you live a somewhat like ordinary life, right? And so there's nothing blowing up in my life, like no major action, but it doesn't mean there isn't a story. And so how do I tell a story that's not driven by conflict? And actually I have a little quote from Ursula that if okay I will share. A lot of authors can sort of recite quotes really fluidly, but I can't, so I wrote this down. And I'll share this. It's a little bit of a North Star for me, actually, while I was drafting, so I'm really happy to share with you. Conflict is one kind of behavior. There are others, equally important in any human life, such as relating, finding, losing, bearing, discovering, parting, and changing. To consider conflict the most important thing in telling a story is a very narrow view of what's important in human life.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. And throughout the book you have lots of authors sprinkled in, and you have all of their words, and it feels like you are really in like a conversation with a lot of authors. And I actually was wondering if you would read one of your epigraphs, the Maggie Nelson one, because I feel like that's kind of relevant to when we're talking about how you sort of write your life authentically. So do you mind reading that for us?
So the epigraph that Katie refers to is from Bluets, which is also one of my favorite books. I'm going to read it first. Look for yourself and ask not what has been real and what has been false, but what has been bitter and what has been sweet. So, first I chose something from Maggie Nelson, and Bluet specifically because of the lyric structure of it, because of the fragments. And as much as I could, I wanted to be able to tell a story where we can have visibility of the in-between, so that in my mind, I feel like the lyric structure of a book is kind of the closest that you can get in prose to poetry, where you are really inviting or trying to invite the reader along and not just telling them what you think. It's a bit of a collaborative process. You're opening up a bit of a space to ask the reader to step in with you, and that's the kind of atmosphere that I wanted to build. And in terms of the quote itself, it's when you attempt to tell a story from your own life, even though it's a non-fiction thing and it's based on facts, very much so it's also an act of curation. And so how to find the truth to anchor this narrative that you're trying to tell. And the truth is somewhere inside your gut. And so my attempt of locating that within me is sort of something about that essence is in that quote.
Yeah, and speaking of guts, we're going to move and speak about your food writing now. You are, of course, a food writer, a restaurant critic. I love reading about your experience of going and eating with all the food, because I am very sad that I didn't become a food critic, so I should have done. But I wanted to ask you about that connection between food writing and writing about self-food and identity, and what that connection between food and identity is for you, and how you wanted to explore that through the book.
I think that food writing traditionally has been done by a very specific kind of writer, typically male, typically quite wealthy in the past, typically privileged. And so, actually not long ago I did an interview with the amazing Chitra Ramaswamy, who is based in Edinburgh. And she is the very first female food critic of colour who has worked for a national newspaper in the UK. So not just in Scotland, but in the history of the UK. And so when you find yourself having the chance to, be in the position of reviewing restaurants or writing about food for a national audience, I very much also felt like it's a time for me to sort of do some kind of subversion, be secretly, have my own secret project as well. Go to more plant-based restaurants than than maybe people typically do. And also one of those things is to take my parents along as plus ones, instead of say someone that you might just picture would go to a trattoria or a French restaurant. It's like a chance for me to try to open up the space and be like, there isn't a typical guest or a typical person who might eat there. And so I try to use that aspect of my work to be a bit political. And in this book, I think I reflect on certain outings with my parents and try to sort of set some scenes in juxtaposition to some of those reviews. So, for instance, I took my mum out to a very romantic restaurant, and it was just the two of us, which she really enjoyed. But I was like, the food's good. So, I was interested in subverting the expectation of, oh, okay, well, it's very lovely to be in a certain kind of place and expect to, like, be wooed in a certain way. And I tried actually to write really romantically about eating on my own, and the intimacy that you can experience in a meal when you have full solitude. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And also, yeah, if there's someone in the world who would give you an honest review of a restaurant, it's Chinese parents.
Yes, very much. There's no holding back.
Yeah, that's what I want to hear from. In the book, you write, I think his name's Clairboyne, a food critic, believed that the critic must stay an outsider. This gives them the distance needed for objective judgment. I was wondering if you agree with this man, the sort of need for objective judgment when it comes to food reviewing, and also, second question, if you think it's applicable to memoir writing as well.
Such a good question, and very philosophical. In terms of objectivity, that's what you sign up to, right? And it's, yes, in food writing, but also in news in general. But as we all know, even if a piece of reportage claims to be completely objective, it's seen through the lens of politics, personal politics, company politics. And so I think that what was interesting to me is the power of being an outsider in that particular aspect of his views. And so Craig Claiborne, who we just quoted from, he actually came from a fairly poor background. So part of his becoming a food critic was also overcoming a certain kind of perception on him, while he was growing up. And I was interested in that chapter. That chapter is called Field Notes. I was interested in that chapter to explore, this idea of role playing when we are in a restaurant. So being a food writer or a food critic, naturally you role play to be like just a normal person, which you are also a normal person, okay? But you are role playing the fact that you're paying for this meal. But also everyone at the restaurant, in a sense, is role playing. Do you find yourself being a little bit nicer when you're eating out? When you're sitting across from a date, feeling more animated, a bit more spirited, partly because someone else is cooking for you, partly because someone else is serving you, but also because you find yourself in a bit of a theatre situation, right? When I was doing the research, a very interesting thing that I realised was that the front of house, which is a very commonly used term for the bit of the restaurant where essentially guests are being served, right? It's where waiters are, it's where diners are. The term actually came from theatre, which is in the theatre context, it refers to everything that's like in front of the stage, so the auditorium, and audience facing things. And so it really invited me to think about our eating lives in public in that way as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've lost the second part of your question.
No, I was just wondering, with this objective judgment idea, if you think that's applicable to life writing and memoir as well. Do you think that's possible?
Yes. Yes. It's quite difficult. I think whenever you are talking about yourself or writing about yourself, it is quite difficult to retain a level of objectivity. Because first of all, if you're a bit like me, you feel a resistance. First of all, you don't want to write about yourself. But then, for some reason, you commit to a whole book about yourself. So, what happened was that I found it really hard at the start to push through, to actually find my voice, or the right voice rather, to steer the book. And what helped was meeting my mentor, Nikesh Shukla, whom Katie also knows. He gave me this piece of advice, which was really useful, which was reminding me that when you are writing about yourself, it's not your full self, because as we were saying earlier, you are still performing an act of curation, and what could help is trying to cast yourself in your mind, find someone else to imagine, but then let yourself still tell that story and picture something happening with that other person's face rather than just the you. And that helps. I won't tell you who I cast. Yeah.
I remember when we would like have chats after we read each other's drafts, and you would always refer to yourself in the book as the narrator and like she, her, and I was like, oh, should I be doing this? Or I was like, because I think I was in the weeds of my memoir, where it felt very much like I had to refer to the version of myself as I. I really like that you were referring to the narrator as like she, what she did.
Yeah, because to me, that helped me. That opened up the arc of the book for me, because if you were to think about, the way your day went, for instance, it's like, can we truly recall what happened to us every single minute? But if we were to, and also, like, there are different facets of ourselves. We talk about me, but actually, like, it's me in this moment in front of a crowd, and me at home is a very different me. And then future me is different from past me. But when you are telling a story, which me should I use, right? And so thinking about that me as the narrator helped me. And also, there is a little bit of a nerdy origin story with thinking like that. Deborah Levy, whom I read a lot during the drafting, and whose living autobiographical series really influenced me craft-wise. She often refers to the I voice in a first-person book to be me, but not quite me. And for her, she draws from Virginia Woolf's views. So yeah, I found that to be generative. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you as well, sort of connecting the food writing to the self-writing about appetite, because with reviewing, you're kind of thinking about who's going to be reading this, and you're thinking about the appetite of the reader, right? So I was wondering, with memoir writing, were you also thinking about the appetite of the reader in that sense, and sort of what maybe their hunger would be like for your like little details of your life? All the gossip.
Well, it's very true that when you're writing about food or a restaurant, you write with the diner in mind. You're almost an avatar for someone else's hunger. And in a way, in the book, the narrator uses that to as an excuse, really, to distance herself from her desire, distance herself from her longings. And that's one of the things that the book kind of subtly tries to draw attention to as well. So that so long as she is still eating on behalf of other people, or she is heeding the call of the cravings of other people, she might not be able to hear her own desire properly. And so, in terms of writing the memoir, I try to just really heed to the desire of the narrator. I didn't really write for the reader's appetite, except for the fact that I wanted to show a specific kind of loneliness that comes from longing, that comes from the desire to be close to people, especially people who are close to you in your life. And that was the aim. And that's when I picture the reader in my mind.
Yeah, that's lovely. Is this a good moment to do your other reading?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, it is. Sip of water from this very nice glass. So, this reading that I'm about to do is from the first part of the book, but the very end of the first part. And it's called Etiquette for the Solo Diner. It might also be interesting to point out here that when I refer to etiquette, it's also an attempt to push back against the idea of etiquette. It's like, are there really true rules that you should follow, on your own, or like when you're with a lover, or indeed when you're with your family? So, in a sense, these chapters are interrogating that idea. Etiquette for the Solo Diner. Gaze. I have a memory of watching a woman eating alone on TV. It is a Japanese drama series, overdubbed in Cantonese. I am 10 or 11, still living in Hong Kong, several years before our next life in Australia. I'm on my own too in this memory. In the scene, the woman wears a lovely cotton outfit, marigold on flowing gingham. Her hair is pinned back in a soft braid. She is laying out a modest dinner of soup, rice, and pickles, and the camera follows her as she sets out the dishes on a small wooden tray. There is no TV in her living room. When everything is ready, she pours herself a cup of hot tea and sits down to eat unhurriedly. The motion of the meal, a mouthful of rice, sips of soup, the rhythm interrupted occasionally with a quick stir of the broth, then sharp, short pickle breaks. In the soft, unobtrusive light, she seems neither bored nor carried away with an exaggerated show of self-satisfaction. She is enjoying the quiet. As she eats, her gaze is light, steady, passing various items on her table, in the room, the stuff of her life, like running a curious hand over fine china. Though I will not understand it for a long time, I am wonder-struck. That specific state of the body produced by solitude, a fleeting elegance, the quiet dignity of it, the feeling of eating as if you were holding court on stage, the moment floodlit, solemn as a Chekhov play. I think back to this scene like a recurring dream, a North Star. My mother eats alone differently. Our large marble table holds the memory of her plain soup noodles made with 2 Maggi stock cubes. All those placeholder meals while Dad was at work, while my sister locked herself in the room studying, and I was out chasing company. In solitude, it is as if her appetite for pleasure is suspended, her desires fused with a full home, a light flicked on just for us. Proxemics. I do not eat at university. I arrange my classes carefully so there are no breaks in between. I am bursting with foreign scripts on the invisible hands of the markets, quantitative methods, demands and supply, wants and needs. I learned that the basic economic problem is that we have unlimited wants but limited resources. I learned that we are want machines. On campus, I am scared of running into anyone I know. I stop eating so I can stay alert. I have a bad feeling I have chosen the wrong things to learn, and I need to stay fit and quick to run away from it. But halfway through the second semester, I find an escape clause. It is possible to disappear through bodies. At lunch hour, in the busiest food court in the quad building, swarms of names, voices, and faces turn daily into a giant heaving body, each person connected, elbow to elbow, by the fact of their hunger and plates of cheap stoner food on hard plastic trays. I relax in the anonymous crowd, which demands nothing of me. A bland, breezy nothingness. I underline these words in the Maureen McCarthy novel I'm reading. I read everything that is not an assigned text. I read that on Titan, one of the 146 moons of Saturn, it rains methane. The raindrops are much bigger and the rain falls much slower because there is little gravity. I eat nachos and chew on the strange storm of being bound to nothing. In the food court, it is nice to be carried along by movement. Nobody makes a big deal of the weather on your planet or suspects that you are stuck when you are surrounded by busy orbiting bodies. In the years to come, I will try to find the same comfort in other anonymous food courts, in the dark of a cinema theatre, in crowded offices, from the crush of strobe-lit bodies in a carousel of photos, in real and imagined cities, on dance floors. Diction. I am 29 and my friend Alana has fallen in love, inconveniently, leading to a wedding in New York. I fly alone to her wedding. It is the end of summer, clear night, and the squashed lemon moon. I share a flat with 3 others, but having woken up late, I spend my first full day in the city alone, walking up and down its enormous grids, ending finally on the Upper West Side. It is too late and I'm too hungry to return downtown before dinner to where I am staying. I push open the door to the first small brasserie I come across on Amsterdam Avenue. Inside, it is all dark wood and crisp white tablecloths. I realize I have never eaten at a nice restaurant alone before. And now, aware of my sweat-soaked clothes and shabby sandals, I feel a tide of self-consciousness ride to my cheeks. Just for one, please. The head waiter does not draw attention to the way I say just, or my visible regret of the word after saying it. When he brings the menu, he does not say, "It's very expensive," in the manner of Marie, the uppity sales assistant in Pretty Woman. I do not get called out for this indulgence. "Would you like to hear the specials?" He smiles for the first time. I would. "Something with mashed potatoes." I miss the first bit but say, "That sounds great," and feel validated when he replies, "Good choice, madam." I order a glass of crisp white wine. With my phone dead and only a foldable map in front of me, I read the opening hours of things and the names of streets while my dinner is being cooked. My body thrills with the old-fashioned adultness of this. When the waiter returns, he brings a side of fine green beans on an oval-y dish and a perfect triangle of cold butter with some white dinner rolls. "One moment for your main." Minutes later, he reappears. And there it is, sitting serenely on a bed of mashed potatoes. I come face to face with what appears to be an entire personal chicken. "Madam, your roasted spatchcock." In that moment, I understand what it is to be free. I will probably never marry, but I can eat a whole chicken on fine linen whenever I want it, and no one will blink an eye because of it. The elation of having no one to answer to, the pleasure of not sharing what too few women know. I feel self-satisfied and sip my wine. In a foreign city, solitude as blank slate, as possibilities. After New York, I stopped saying just for one.
That's so good. I wanted to ask you about the yeah, this idea of like loneliness, like what you were reading from there, and solitude as well, because with the book, with the three structures, etiquette for the solo diner, lovers, and its family table, you're kind of giving like a third of the book structurally to yourself or someone alone, and that feels like a really wonderful thing and like a very freeing thing, I imagine, or maybe a stressful thing as well. I don't know, but I was wondering why you wanted to give that much space to write about solitude and just sort of moving through the world by yourself.
That's a lovely question. Thanks, Kate. I think about there's a secret thesis in this book, and one that I, sort of is in the back of my mind while I was drafting, and it is. I'm just telling you guys. I haven't told anyone else. And it is, why is it so close to feel? Look, why is it so hard to feel close to the people who are supposed to be the closest to us? Why is that so hard? And that's the thing that gets you, right? It's like, you won't go up to a stranger and be like, why aren't we tight? Or even your workmate, really, or work colleague, and you're like, that's fine, like, distance is good. But when it comes to someone in your life, like, who is supposed to know you and understand you and get you, and you feel that gap, that's the gap that makes you feel lonely. And so in a way, this book is trying to, like, figure out what that gap is and why it exists, and whether gestures or language can actually ultimately fill that gap, or whether neither is perfect, that you need both, or one is better than the other. And as you read the book and move through the chapters, you'll see the narrator sort of encountering or trying out different solutions to fill that gap. So in a sense, it is that, and because I feel like this book is about, underscoring this book is an exploration of, like, how we hold ourselves in relationships. And one of the main relationships, or, like, the biggest one, is the one with ourselves. So when I was drafting it, I felt this need, or like this desire, to put that relationship also, on under the spotlight.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And as well as that, I mean, with the title, it's obviously focusing on your family and your parents as well. And I was wondering how you wanted to tell the story of your family's history and your family's migration, often through food and through culinary experiences, and how you find sort of discovering, like, food writing was a way of telling that story of migration. How do you find that?
Yeah, it's it can. So writing about one's life through food, it can be a bit of an easy way out, because food itself by nature is so sensorial. Immediately you're like, okay, well, I'll find out what these people are eating. Like, it's kind of interesting. But it kind of became the siphon for me to tell the story of my family history, because I realized that we use food as a bit of a placeholder for not just for love, not just for care, but like for slightly more difficult harder to express feelings as well. So I the other yesterday at the event that I did, I was saying that my mum rarely asks us how we are. So at dinner, she might just like observe and do like a bit of a scan of how my sister and I are doing. And then suddenly a fried egg might appear, like as part of the meal that you realize is an extra thing. And so without her saying anything, essentially, you realize that she, first of all, noticed that you're not quite yourself. And then, secondly, is like attempting to make you feel a little bit better without having to say anything, which is very genius. And so, in a sense, it's a little bit like that. Sort of me trying to understand exactly what it is that my parents have been trying to communicate to me, you know, through the things that we've been eating and also our ritual. But it might also be an interesting like gap to say the title itself, Chinese parents don't say I love you. It seems like a sort of, you know, it's a straightforward enough statement. You know what it is. But I was thinking that, you know, the interesting thing is depending on how you say this sentence, it also has different inflections. So if I say, Chinese parents don't say I love you, you're like, okay, these people aren't monsters. They just don't say it. They express care in a different way. Or if I say Chinese parents don't say I love you, okay, well then they say something else. So even a very simple sentence like that shows that language can be a very blunt instrument and quite often open to different interpretations. So then, you know, how do we plug that gap of interpretation? Then do we use gestures to do that? Gestures like food. And so that's part of what the book is trying to interrogate.
Yeah, I have a last question before we open up to audience questions, so just start thinking. I wanted to just jump on what you're saying there, because I'm really interested in like this idea of like don't say. So there's like a silence there, right? I'm really interested in like the negative space in books where it's like, because there's so much dialogue, right? So like what's not being said between that dialogue, and there's so much of the book where it's you reflecting on what's not being said between you and your parents, or the narrator is like thinking something but not saying something, and sort of having this conversation with her parent, and he's doing the same thing. And I was really interested in this use of silence in the book, or this use of gesture, and how you wanted to incorporate that into the narrative. So, you know, I think that it can be tempting to fill things with like conversation and dialogue, but how did you want to incorporate those like silence moments and those gestures as well?
Yeah, so the silence itself is a very powerful thing. I don't know if you've been in a phone conversation before where the person at the end of the line isn't saying anything and you're like, uh-oh. Like it's worse than the other person arguing back or something, right? So silence itself inhabits tension. And I'm interested in showing that kind of tension sometimes when we're interacting with people that we're supposed to know. And then I also am very, you know, I like to allow readers to also kind of give room for stepping into the story as well, because I think that you necessarily recall moments where you're like, oh, okay, like, you know, I've been in a situation like this before. Like, what have I said in a moment like that? And if I were to fill every gap with interpretation, then I'm not really leaving the reader with moments of reflection of their own. And yeah, my hope is that there are those bits of sparseness, similar to the way that poetry tries to do that with line breaks, with juxtaposition, so that you're pointing at things and not just like trying to really ram it down people's throats.
Yeah. All right, no silence. It's
Okay, no,
time.
but no
Okay,
silence
okay.
here.
So I think we need to, when someone asks a question, I think we need to repeat the question for
Yes.
people watching at home. So
Yes.
we'll do that. But if you have a question, you can put up your hand.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's a full world in that question. I will repeat that question, so sorry. Yeah, before the event, I asked Katie to please remind me to remember to repeat the question, which I promptly forget. So the question is about my writing process, and also how do I use what aspect of dining or eating together is the most powerful that I see as the most powerful to illustrate dynamics between people in a scene. So that's a really interesting and crafty thing, because it asks me really to also it gives me a flashback first of all, but also so when I'm writing about a dining scene, I think about, or any action scene really, I kind of think about this one William Carlos Williams thing, who says there's no ideas but in things. So essentially, you're trying to enact or embody an idea or a dynamic through action. And when you're eating, the most interesting thing often is people's response to a dish, or people's response to your response to a dish. So then the most powerful thing to me is to remember what it's like to stand from a certain vantage point, really. Again, going back to that slightly outsider's perspective, you get this chance to observe your dining companion, or like it might be my parents in a scene, or a lover. There is a lover in the book, in the scene, and it's almost through what the narrator notices about her parents or about that lover, that's what tells the story. That says something about the kind of person that she is, what she's paying attention to, and why. Yeah. I hope that answers part of your question.
I also was wondering, because in the book you talk about going to a screenwriting course.
Yes.
$900.
Yes, it's $900. It's very expensive.
I say that because anytime you mention the course, you write $900.
I say because it's very expensive.
And it's repeated several times.
Yes.
I was wondering, like, what did you learn from the course that you used in the book? Like, because there's so much dialogue actually in the book. Did you pick up any tips from the screenwriting course, $900?
So, and I don't know if I got ripped off or anything, because one of the major points which my writing instructor emphasized was show, don't tell, right? Which is a very fundamental instruction in any kind of writing, on screen or off. But actually, on reflection, because I needed to make some use of that course, I thought deeply about that one instruction. And I felt that actually, where I first observed that instruction is from my parents. And they're really like show don't tell kind of people. Like they're the OG screenwriting instructors. They rarely tell, but really the idea also is that there is such close observation of each other's temperament, of attunement, ideally, that's what produces the unspoken communication. And the way that closeness is felt or sometimes performed is that, oh, I know you so well, I care about you so much that I know what you need without you even having to tell me. Just the act of you telling me or me having to tell you actually erases that closeness a little bit. It insults that closeness a little bit. So it was interesting for me to like think about that from that perspective.
Worth $900, maybe?
Maybe.
Maybe. Are there any other questions?
Yes. Thank you. Great question, thank you. So the question is, when I'm writing about food and setting a scene where there is food, doesn't matter what kind of food it is, and I guess in what way does it influence the scene? I think that it does, because one of the things that is interesting to me is our public eating selves versus our private eating selves. So there's a little piece in showing the domesticity of the in revealing the way that you behave in your own home with a potential partner, for instance. That feels very intimate to me. And so when I'm writing those scenes that are set at home, my own home, or the person that I was dating in that book, who was a geographer, when I was in the geographer's home and he was cooking for me early in the book, that setting is important because it shows us in the geographer's natural habitat, for instance. And that reveals something about a person in a way that it doesn't if you're just having a nice candlelit meal. So it may not be specifically the fact that, one ate gnocchi and that's going to be a very tense scene, or or a sandwich and it's going to be like a very casual moment. But it's more, how does that meal or that moment, that setting, bring about the thing that, you want to reveal, I think. And of course, because one of the tricky things too is that necessarily these scenes are based on real life. So again, the idea of curation comes to mind. And luckily, we try to eat at least 3 meals a day. So you have plenty to choose from, and you're choosing the ones that are telling the bigger story that you want to tell. Thank you. Yes?
How has the writing process changed your own relationship to food and your relationship that's still in your life,
Thank you. So the question is, how has the writing process changed my relationship to food, or the way that I eat with others, right? Yeah, that's wonderful. I have been thinking about that because that's exactly one of the questions that was asked yesterday when I was at an event as well. So congratulations. And Ryoko here, who was in the last event, gets to hear this again. So congratulations to you too. But in Well, in all honesty, I was thinking that I had always suspected food to be such a driver in my own life, in the sense that it's how I, well, it's how I organize my day, clearly, and for a time it was part of my work, but also it's how I navigate a city, a lot of the time. I picture neighborhoods in my mind sometimes via what bakeries there are. 'Cause they're the important things that you need to clock in your head. But it's very hard for me to remember like specific streets, for instance. But I can picture where the bakeries are. So on a very like practical or like really real life sense, that's what writing the book helped me realize, is how much I orient myself via things that have to do with food. In real life too, food very much is the way I forge intimacy with people who are in my life. So the first friend that I made, I like just really literally texted him out cold and was like, would you like to eat something together? And in Glasgow, that is, not just the very first friend that I made in my life. I did not know how to say these things back then. And we already had food from our parents, so so it's a way to try to kind of like it's a way to broker awkward situations as well, when you're with people that you don't quite know. So yeah, I think that writing it has reaffirmed that for me. And it may not be like an entirely new relationship to food, but it helped me realize how central a role that it plays in my life. Yes.
Do you have a favorite kind of food to eat and a favorite kind of food to write about?
The question, which is very delightful, is do I have a favorite kind of food to eat and a favorite kind of food to write about? I want to say more interesting things, but my partner is here, so and my partner knows that I always try to seek out Japanese food whenever I go to a new city, because there's lots of delicious Japanese food in Sydney, where I grew up and where I live, but it's been harder to find that in Glasgow, where I now live. So that's the first thing that I always seek out. But in terms of a food that gives me ultimate comfort, I go back a lot on rice itself. I am a rice person in the way that people are bread people or dessert people. I can eat rice anytime. I did for breakfast this morning. And that is the thing that gives me comfort. So, and it's not really just the act of eating it, but it's a sensorial experience of cooking rice. You can smell the rice bubbling as it's being cooked, and the gurgling of your rice cooker, for instance. All of that gives me a lot of comfort and happiness. So when I need to coax myself into feeling better, that is one of the first things that I go back to. And inevitably, I think it's like an early comfort thing. When I was writing this book, I went and read quite a few food memoirs from all different ages, right? So I've read Nigel Slater's Toast, MFK Fisher, the usual suspects. But in Nigel Slater's Toast, he talks about this fondness for burnt toast because it reminds him, of course, of his mum. And he's like, it is impossible not to love someone who makes you toast. And so for me, that is rice. So I like to, that is to say, that is the thing that brings me comfort. But in terms of writing about food, I actually don't really mind what kind of food. It's all fun to write about.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's us. That's all the time we have. Thank thank you so much, Candice. This was so great.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone for your wonderful questions, for your presence, for being here at this time, even before the book actually comes out into the world. I feel very special to be in this space, this cocoon with you, and to share this work with everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, and also use this opportunity to buy Candice's book and come and get it signed by Candice. And thank you to Lighthouse for having us. And that's it.
Thank you,
so much.
Lighthouse team. Thank you.